I was halfway out the door with a duffel bag, rushing to see my dad in the ER, when I saw it, an entire line of SUVs, Teslas, and eco-friendly clown cars completely blocking my driveway. One woman was performing a slow-motion cartwheel next to my mailbox. Another guy, shirtless and soaked in oil, sat cross-legged on my lawn like he was auditioning to be Buddha. And there, dead center in the chaos, was Karen, arms raised to the sun, chanting something about aligning her soul portal. My truck wasn't going anywhere, and apparently, neither was I. I honked once. Karen turned her head slightly, smiled like a Disney villain in yoga pants, and said, "Shoo, we're cleansing the neighborhood energy." That was the moment I swore vengeance. Spiritual vengeance. 2 weeks earlier, life had been quiet. I own a few acres on the edge of a semi-rural neighborhood, with a long gravel driveway that winds past trees and leads up to my cabin. Peaceful. Private. My neighbors on either side were older retirees who kept to themselves, and I liked it that way. But then, she moved in. Karen. She bought the house next door and announced her presence by hanging a massive wooden sign from her porch. The Zen Den. Heal. Awaken. Repeat. That should have been my first warning. The second came when I found a burning bundle of sage on my porch with a note that read, "For your negative energies. No need to thank me." At first, I tried to be civil. Karen told me she was a yoga instructor, influencer, and holistic lifestyle facilitator, which is apparently code for unemployed with too much Wi-Fi. She said she was running small weekend retreats on her property. Nothing loud, just a few people looking to realign their lives. I didn't care, as long as they didn't touch my driveway. My land was clearly marked with private signs, and my driveway was not a shortcut, not a parking lot, not a shared resource. I made that crystal clear. Or so I thought. The first retreat weekend, a few cars parked along the side of the road. Mildly annoying, but manageable. The second weekend, I found people stretching across my driveway. One lady had set up an entire picnic at the base of my mailbox. I went over and asked politely, if they could move. Karen brushed me off with a wave of her lemon water and said, "We're all one with the land, neighbor. You're part of this too." By the third weekend, I was getting fed up. Not just with the cars and the chanting, but the complete disregard for common courtesy. My driveway was blocked twice in 1 week, and when I confronted Karen, she told me I should try deep breathing. She offered me a free yoga class as a peace offering. I declined. Firmly. And then came the weekend. The weekend that changed everything. Friday started out normal. I was at work when I got a call from my brother saying Dad had collapsed and was being rushed to the hospital 3 towns over. I threw everything in my truck, heart pounding, and raced home to grab an overnight bag. I didn't even notice the parked cars at first. Not until I turned the final corner and saw it, my entire driveway looked like a yoga-themed used car lot. There were no fewer than 9 cars blocking me in. One dude was doing handstands on the tailgate of a Prius. 2 women were taking selfies in front of a makeshift arch made from driftwood. The whole place smelled like patchouli and smugness. My truck was hemmed in like it owed someone money. I laid on the horn. Nothing. I rolled down the window and yelled. Karen, standing in the center of the mess with her eyes closed and arms raised like she was summoning the sun, opened one eye and calmly said, "This is a sacred moment. Can you come back later?" I could have lost it right there. I wanted to scream. But instead, I took a breath, snapped a few photos, and quietly drove across the lawn, ripping a few of her precious garden lights out by the roots as I went. I didn't even look back. Dad was okay. Dehydration, blood pressure scare. He was going to be fine. But by the time I returned that night, I wasn't just angry, I was inspired. Because while sitting in that hospital chair, scrolling through my phone, I remembered something. Something glorious. A friend of mine, from back in college, ran a local monster truck club. And a few years ago, I helped him win a land use dispute with the zoning board. He'd always said, "If you ever need the favor returned, just say the word." Oh, I was going to say the word. Loudly. with turbocharged tires and a soundtrack of destruction. The plan formed quicker than I expected. I checked zoning laws. I filed a permit. I even called the county to confirm noise regulations on private land. Everything was lining up. And then I sent out the message: Monster Truck Charity Rally. One-day event. All welcome. Bring earplugs. The proceeds would go to veterans support programs, which made it both legal and morally bulletproof. Karen wanted to block my driveway for a spiritual awakening? Fine. I was going to awaken the entire neighborhood, with fire, engines, and raw horsepower. But I wasn't done yet. I needed to make sure Karen knew exactly what was coming. So the next day, I hand-delivered a formal notice, event plans, permits, and a personalized note. Heads up, Karen. My driveway will be in use this weekend. Hope your guests are good at downward dodging. She tried to smile it off, but her eye twitched when she saw the permit seal. The best part? I hadn't even told her about the lineup yet. 5 trucks. One called Tirazilla. Another named Crankosaurus Rex. And the headliner? Blunderbuss Betty, complete with flame decals and a horn that played ACUDC. This wasn't just revenge. This was tactical karma. A full throttle, engine revving lesson in what happens when you push a quiet neighbor too far. And the best was still to come. Karen had no idea what she'd unleashed. The yoga retreat might have been her sanctuary, her little empire of organic salads and misquoted Eastern philosophy, but to me, it had become ground zero for a full-scale revenge operation. After she blocked my driveway during a family emergency and told me to come back later because she was centering her vibrations, something in me snapped, but not in the dramatic movie villain way. No, I snapped in the most precise, bureaucratically legal, thunderously satisfying way imaginable. First, I reached out to Jesse, my old college buddy and founder of the local Monster Truck Club, a man who once turned a junkyard Honda into a mudslinging machine called Dirt Justice. When he picked up the phone and heard my voice, he laughed before I could even explain. I hadn't spoken to him in over a year, but he remembered the zoning board favor I'd pulled for his team like it happened yesterday. He owed me one, and I was cashing in. When I explained the situation, Karen, the driveway, the retreat, the insufferable handstands, he didn't hesitate. His exact words were, "Dude, say no more. I've been waiting my whole life for a reason to crush a yoga mat." We picked a weekend 3 weeks out. Enough time for planning, enough time for legal work, and most importantly, enough time to let Karen think she'd won. While she posted filtered photos of people doing tree pose under her wind chimes, I was quietly assembling the loudest team in the county. Jesse lined up 5 trucks. Tirazilla, Crankosaurus Rex, Blunderbuss Betty, Mudslinger Prime, and an old-school flame-covered beast named El Toro Grande. These weren't just monster trucks. They were beasts that belched fire, crushed concrete, and played Eye of the Tiger through exhaust pipe. The best part? I wasn't just doing this to make a point. I decided to make it a charity rally for the local children's burn center and a veterans rehab facility. That made it not only crowd-pleasing but also bulletproof from any legal or moral backlash. I filed every necessary permit, secured a temporary event exemption, and even had a food truck vendor sign up, a guy who sold smoked ribs and deep-fried Oreos from a trailer shaped like a pig. The town council loved it. The zoning board signed off. The sheriff's department agreed to swing by for crowd control. Every form had a signature. Every box was checked. This wasn't just a petty feud anymore. It was a fundraiser with a vengeance. With the groundwork laid, I turned my attention back to Karen. I dropped the official event notice in her mailbox with the permits attached. She confronted me the next morning, clutching the papers like they were forged in the fires of hell. She stood barefoot on my gravel, wearing a long flowing tunic and a frown that looked like it had been hand-carved by disappointment itself. "You can't just throw a monster truck event," she shrieked, waving the permit. "This is a healing space." I told her very calmly that it was private property, legally zoned for events under community exemption clauses, and that her guests might want to consider using alternative parking, especially since her last retreat had resulted in 9 cars illegally blocking my driveway. She blinked rapidly, clearly trying to summon her inner zen but mostly just managing to look constipated. "It's noise pollution. You're poisoning the energy of this neighborhood." I smiled. "Funny, that's how I felt when a shirtless guy was drumming on a bongo outside my window during your last moon awakening ceremony." She stormed off without another word, probably to consult her crystals. But I knew Karen wasn't going to take this lying down. The next few days were full of suspiciously timed visits from people who looked like city inspectors. One asked to see my water runoff permit. Another claimed I had an unregistered structure in the backyard, my shed, which had stood there since 2003. I welcomed them all with open arms, knowing full well everything was in order. I had even preemptively submitted digital records, just in case. Every single attempt Karen made to derail my plan bounced off like yoga balls hitting a tank. Then, the week before the event, she tried the nuclear option, a cease and desist letter, hand-delivered by a smug lawyer who smelled like patchouli and desperation. The letter cited spiritual trespass, emotional sabotage, and my personal favorite, the aggressive undermining of mindful commerce. I almost laughed in the guy's face. Instead, I handed him my event permit, the notarized approval forms, and a copy of the charity flyer. I told him he was welcome to attend. Tickets were free with a suggested donation, and I'd be selling commemorative t-shirts with a monster truck doing yoga on a flattened mat. The day before the rally, Karen tried one last desperate move. She posted all over the neighborhood Facebook group claiming that a violent event was going to disturb the peace and asking residents to sign a petition to shut it down. She said monster trucks would endanger wildlife and scare children. Ironically, the only person who commented was a neighbor named Tom, who replied, "Will there be food trucks?" followed by 15 fire emojis. By then, everyone knew what was going on. People were choosing sides, and most of them were on mine. They'd been quietly annoyed by Karen's nonsense too, her incense clouds drifting across yards, her singing bowls at 6 a.m., her accidental parking on other people's lawns. The monster truck rally had become more than an event. It was a reckoning. That night, as I stood in my backyard watching the trucks arrive on trailers, I felt the first real surge of satisfaction. El Toro Grande was the last to show up, its paint job glinting under the moonlight, the smell of fuel and victory thick in the air. Jessie walked up beside me, handed me a beer, and said, "So where's this yoga lady?" I brought earplugs just in case she tries to scream the trucks away. I laughed and pointed to the house next door. It was dark, quiet, and probably full of herbal panic. Karen had no idea what tomorrow was going to sound like. She could chant, meditate, and align all the chakras she wanted. But when those engines roared to life and the first tire touched ground, she was going to feel every decibel in her bones. Revenge wasn't just coming. It was coming on 66-inch tires, and it brought barbecue. The sun rose like any other Saturday, but the air was thick with anticipation and diesel fumes. I was up before dawn, making final preparations. The food trucks rolled in first, parking in the side lot I'd cleared the week before. Next came the crew from the local fire department, volunteering as safety staff. Then, one by one, the monster trucks thundered in, each one more ridiculous and magnificent than the last. Tirazilla, Crankosaurus Rex, Blunderbuss Betty, El Toro Grande, and Mudslinger Prime, all lined up like an apocalyptic parade with a license to thrill. Their drivers hopped out in matching jackets, high-fiving and laughing like kids on Christmas morning. Jessie gave me a nod from across the lot, shouting over the growl of idling engines, "Time to wake the neighborhood." I glanced over at Karen's property. Her front lawn had been transformed again, this time with neatly arranged yoga mats, hanging prayer flags, and an enormous homemade banner that read, "Breathe in peace, breathe out negativity." It was just past 8 a.m., and her first retreat session of the day was already underway. About a dozen guests sat cross-legged in rows, eyes closed, arms raised to the sky like they were trying to catch enlightenment. If any of them noticed the 5-story tall beasts revving up less than 100 feet away, they didn't show it. Or maybe they just assumed it was thunder. That assumption wasn't going to last long. At precisely 8:30, I gave Jesse the go-ahead. He climbed into Tirazilla and fired it up completely, sending a blast of noise that echoed off the hills like the earth itself was protesting meditation. The sound was thunderous, primal, and deeply satisfying. Birds fled trees. A dog 2 blocks over started howling. And over at the Zen den, the first few yoga poses faltered as heads turned in confusion. Karen stood at the front of the group, eyes still closed, pretending nothing was happening. Jesse didn't stop there. He laid into the horn, a custom mod that played an off-key rendition of Eye of the Tiger. The ground vibrated. Dust kicked up. Karen's eyes finally snapped open, her calm demeanor melting into wide-eyed horror as she stared across the property line at 5 monster trucks rumbling to life. One of her guests stood up, unsure whether to keep chanting or run for cover. I walked over to the edge of my driveway, raised a coffee mug in her direction, and gave the friendliest wave I could muster. She stormed over seconds later, barefoot and livid, her perfectly combed ponytail flapping like a flag of war. She screamed over the roar of the engines, demanding I stop immediately. "This is a spiritual ceremony," she yelled. "You are violating my sacred space." I gestured toward the official event permit, now proudly mounted on a post near the entrance, and replied with a shrug, "We're just doing a little fundraising. For sick kids and veterans. Want to donate?" Karen's face went beet red. She turned and stomped back to her guests, trying to salvage what was left of her session. But it was too late. Blunderbuss Betty was now airborne, leaping off a dirt ramp I'd had built earlier in the week and landing with a crash that knocked over 2 of her decorative rock towers. Every impact was a declaration. Every roar of the engine was a symphony of revenge. One of Karen's guests screamed when Mudslinger Prime drifted too close to the property line, sending a wave of dust across the yoga mat. The tranquil sounds of wind chimes and chanting were now being drowned out by engine roars, cheering spectators, and the sizzling of barbecue ribs. Karen tried everything short of physical assault to shut us down. First, she began waving her arms and yelling at passing guests, claiming they were being energetically exploited. No one listened. Then she called the sheriff's department. I watched her on the phone, pacing in front of her house, pointing toward the trucks like she was reporting a war crime. When the sheriff finally arrived, it was none other than my cousin Luke, who I'd spoken with earlier in the week. He walked the perimeter, checked the permits, and gave me a thumbs up. Then he strolled over to Karen, who began ranting about vibrational harm and sound-based aggression. Luke, bless him, listened patiently before saying, "Ma'am, everything's in order. They're fully permitted. And also, if I may, that truck there is raising money for a kid who needs a prosthetic leg. You might want to reconsider the optics here." Karen sputtered, speechless, and marched back to her house, slamming the door so hard it rattled her wind chimes into chaos. The rest of the day went exactly as planned. We had events every hour. Ramp jumps, tire pulls, donut contests, and even a yoga mat pancake exhibition where drivers flattened old rubber mats we'd collected from gyms across town. Each activity was louder, dirtier, and more joyful than the last. Kids were laughing, adults were cheering, and people were donating by the fistful. One guy even bought a t-shirt that said, "Namaste this," with a picture of Tirazilla doing a burnout over a lotus flower. By early afternoon, we'd raised more than $3,000. Meanwhile, Karen's retreat disintegrated into chaos. Some of her guests tried to hold sessions inside, but the sound of revving engines still rattled the windows. A few left entirely, dragging their mats behind them with defeated expressions. Her so-called healing sanctuary was now under siege, not by hate or malice, but by fun, legality, and a whole lot of horsepower. By sunset, only 3 guests remained, one of whom was sitting on her porch Googling refund policy for holistic retreats. As the final truck revved its engine for the closing ceremony, I caught a glimpse of Karen watching from her upstairs window, a single candle flickering beside her. She looked tired, defeated. The Zen had been thoroughly, unapologetically disrupted, and all I'd done was follow every rule she'd ignored, and turn the volume up to 11. The crowd dispersed slowly, still buzzing with excitement. Jesse gave me a bro hug and promised to send me a plaque with my official honorary monster truck nickname. The food trucks sold out. My neighbors clapped me on the back, laughing and telling me it was the best thing they'd seen in years. And me? I finally walked back inside my house, cracked open a cold beer, and sat down with the kind of peace Karen's chanting never could have brought me. But I had a feeling this wasn't over just yet. People like Karen don't go down without a final act, and I was more than ready for whatever her last move might be. Sunday morning arrived with a silence so thick it felt suspicious. No revving engines, no fireworks, no monster truck. Just birdsong, the hum of a distant lawn mower, and the eerie stillness of a neighborhood holding its breath after the storm. My ears were still ringing faintly from the previous day, but the smile on my face was unshakable. The monster truck rally had gone off without a hitch, had raised a pile of money for charity, and had sent a message to Karen so loud it probably echoed into her dreams. I thought the war was over. I thought wrong. By mid-morning, I noticed a peculiar uptick in phone notifications. Texts from neighbors. DMs on social media. Mentions on Reddit. That's when I saw it. Someone had posted a video from the rally, not just of the trucks but of Karen's full-blown meltdown during Blunderbuss Betty's power slide. There she was in glorious HD, screaming at the sheriff, ranting about spiritual trauma and acoustic terrorism, while in the background a monster truck did donuts with a flag that said, "Peace through power." The video had gone viral overnight. One of the top posts on the Entitled People subreddit. Over 300,000 upvote. The comments section was a digital roastathon. They'd nicknamed her Cranky Chakra Karen. I knew the moment Karen saw it. Around noon, I saw her front door fling open like it had been kicked. She stood on her porch with a stack of printed-out screenshots in her hands, looking like a guru who'd just been excommunicated. The top of the stack showed her yelling mid-sentence, mouth open wide, eyes wild, with the caption, "When your root chakra gets run over by AV8. She paced for hours. I heard her yelling on the phone, probably to whoever handled her retreat website, which by now was swarming with 1-star reviews and links to the video. The downfall of Karen's business was not just fast, it was spectacular. Guests started requesting refunds. She issued a public apology on Facebook that only made things worse. It was one of those vague, defensive non-apologies that said things like, "I'm sorry you were offended by my spiritual practices, and I was merely trying to create a healing space free from toxic masculine energy and motor oil." That only fanned the flames. Memes were popping up faster than she could delete them. One had a side-by-side of her screaming with the caption, "Yoga, not even once." Another had her face edited onto a monster truck being driven by Buddha. Karen tried to fight back. She emailed local news stations, claiming she was being targeted in a smear campaign by a group of emotionally unstable engine enthusiasts. No one took the bait. The charity angle from the rally had been too strong. The sheriff had gone on record with the local paper, praising the event's organization and community impact. It even got picked up on a morning radio show, where callers laughed about the Zen Den Demolition Derby. Karen was losing control of the narrative, and for someone like her, that was worse than losing her driveway privileges. But Karen wasn't done yet. No, she wanted blood, or at least a small claims court victory. A week later, I received a court summons. Karen had filed a lawsuit against me for emotional distress, loss of business revenue, property damage from dust and engine vibrations, and something called chi disruption. I didn't even know you could sue for that. She had hired the same patchouli-scented lawyer from before, who'd probably been promised a lifetime supply of herbal tea and aura readings. I wasn't even mad. If anything, I was impressed by the creativity of her list of grievances. I contacted my own lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Barbara, who once won a case against a man who sued a zoo for emotional damage caused by staring lemurs. The courtroom was packed. Word had spread around the neighborhood. Apparently, monster truck revenge and yoga wars were more entertaining than cable. Karen showed up dressed in flowing white robes, clutching a mala necklace and a folder of complaints. I wore jeans and a t-shirt with a monster truck crushing a lotus flower, just to set the tone. The judge, a dry old man who looked like he hadn't smiled since 1993, took one look at the case details and sighed so hard I thought his soul was trying to leave his body. Karen's lawyer opened with a long-winded explanation about sacred energy, unauthorized vibrations, and the emotional contamination of tranquil airspace. He even tried to argue that my event created a psychological barrier that prevented her clients from achieving spiritual release. The judge blinked slowly, scribbled something, and asked him to get to the actual legal grounds. My lawyer stood up, cool and calm, and handed over a binder thicker than a phone book. Inside were permits, emails, donation receipts, photos of the rally, and video clips of Karen yelling in front of a sheriff. Barbara even printed out some of the memes. Exhibit H. Popular online reactions showing general public perception of the plaintiff. The judge took one look at Karen's viral face and let out a dry chuckle he tried to cover with a cough. After 2 hours of testimony, the ruling came swiftly and decisively. The judge dismissed Karen's claims, fined her for operating an unlicensed commercial retreat business on residential property, and ordered her to reimburse 2 guests who testified that she promised them peace and privacy, but delivered a front-row seat to a monster truck rally. Her spiritual empire was officially declared a public nuisance. She looked like she'd just been hit with a karmic sledgehammer. The fallout was immediate. Karen tried to spin it one last time online, posting a teary-eyed video about being misunderstood and oppressed by patriarchal machinery, but no one was buying it. Her followers dwindled. Her website went offline. Within a month, a for sale sign went up in her yard. The Zen Den was dead. I threw a backyard cookout to celebrate. Invited everyone, neighbors, firemen, Jesse and the whole monster truck crew. Even the judge got a personal invite, though he politely declined. Karen, meanwhile, packed her essential oils and disappeared in the night, probably off to find a more receptive audience for her chakra chants and driveway domination tactic. As we ate ribs and watched El Toro Grande do a burnout on an old yoga mat for fun, I realized something important. You don't have to be loud to make a point. But if you are going to be loud, make it legal, make it charitable, and make sure the barbecue is hot. Because when life hands you a Karen, sometimes the best thing you can do is rev your engine, fire up the grill, and show the world that revenge really is a dish best served with horsepower. It's been a few months since the rally, and life has returned to a kind of peace that even Karen's most determined gongs and incense clouds could never achieve. The birds are back. The driveway is clear. The neighborhood smells like fresh-cut grass and barbecued sanity, not sandalwood and passive-aggressive judgment. Sometimes I still hear the faint echo of Tirazilla roaring in the distance, but maybe that's just a happy memory playing back like a favorite song. There's no more late-night chanting next door. No more retreat flyers. No more kombucha coolers dumped by the property line. Just quiet, glorious silence until taco night, that is. Karen never spoke to me again after the court verdict. She disappeared almost as dramatically as she had arrived, her white flowing outfits packed into suitcases and stuffed into the back of a rental SUV. One of her remaining guests helped her load crystals into milk crates while trying not to make eye contact with any of us. The for sale sign didn't last long. The house went quickly, likely to some city couple who thought rural life would be charming. I braced myself for another potential nightmare, but instead, I got Luis, a food truck owner who makes the best smoked brisket tacos I've ever tasted in my life. Luis moved in 2 weeks after Karen left and rolled his truck into the driveway like it was the chariot of the taco god. He introduced himself with a 6-pack of craft beer and a handshake firm enough to impress a farmer. I told him about what had happened with Karen, bracing for the usual reaction, but instead he laughed so hard he nearly dropped his beer. A week later, he hosted his first truck and taco night in his driveway, invited the whole neighborhood, and asked me to fire up the monster truck rally footage on a projector screen. Just like that, what started as vengeance evolved into tradition. Once a month now, the neighborhood gathers in our yards, lawn chairs in rows, with plates piled high with barbecue, tacos, and sides people haven't dared bring to a potluck in years. Someone brings cornhole boards. A couple teens bring guitars. The sheriff swings by just to hang out and grab a sandwich. It's wholesome chaos, and the air buzzes with the kind of joy that doesn't need incense or curated playlists to feel sacred. Karen's old house, once a place for overpriced yoga mats and overpriced spiritual advice, is now a taco sanctuary. A true place of healing. What surprises me most is how many people still talk about the rally like it was a historical event. Not just neighbors, but folks from the next town over. People who saw the Reddit post, watched the viral video, shared the memes. Every now and then I get a message from someone who just discovered the story and wants to know if the shirts are still available. They are. Jesse had a second run printed after the first batch sold out in under 48 hours. Apparently, there's a whole corner of the internet that now sees me as the guy who weaponized monster trucks against a yoga Karen. I'm not mad about it. It's not a title I ever expected, but honestly, I've had worse nicknames. Some people ask me if I ever felt bad about how it went down. If I think I overreacted. I tell them the truth. I never wanted a war. I never wanted attention or to go viral. I just wanted to use my driveway, live in peace, and not have to navigate a labyrinth of parked Subarus just to check my mail. But when someone goes out of their way to disrespect your space, your time, and your boundaries, sometimes you have to make a little noise to be heard. In my case, a lot of noise. From a fleet of custom-built monster truck. The rally wasn't revenge for its own sake. It was a reminder that civility has limits, especially when one side refuses to meet you halfway. Karen ignored warnings, disrespected private property, and acted like she owned the street. She tried to bully, manipulate, and guilt-trip me into accepting her version of harmony, which, ironically, was entirely one-sided. All I did was hold up a mirror. A very loud, exhaust-belching mirror with fire decals. And the best part? The rally did more than make a point. It did real good. Over $7,000 raised between the Veterans Fund and the kids' medical charity. A community brought together. Friendships rekindled. And not a single yoga mat was harmed beyond recognition that didn't deserve it. Luis and I sat outside one night, watching the stars, the last bits of the crowd from taco night finally filtering out. He asked me if I'd ever do another rally. I told him maybe. Not for revenge this time, but for fun. He suggested combining it with a chili cook-off. Then his eyes lit up and he asked if monster trucks could tow giant grills. Next thing I knew, we were sketching out plans on the back of a napkin, dreaming bigger than either of us had planned when we first moved here. Funny how chaos brings clarity. So now, every time I walk out to my driveway, I think about how things started. A simple request to not block the way. A woman who couldn't take no for an answer. And a community that came together in the loudest, most hilarious way possible to defend something as basic as respect. My driveway is clear. My weekends are peaceful. And my neighborhood is stronger than it's ever been. All because someone couldn't park 30 feet to the left. And if Karen ever does return someday, perhaps drawn by rumors of a rejuvenated energy field or a forgotten yoga mat buried under the lawn, I'll be ready. Not with anger, not with lawsuit, but with barbecue, engines, and the entire neighborhood gathered for one loud, joyful reminder. Don't mess with people who just want to be left alone. Because sometimes the quietest neighbor turns out to be the one with the biggest truck.